This is Abhishek, and in this video I'm going to walk you through my Neovim configs and specifically how I have configured them. So if you like the config, maybe you can do the same or create a variant of this. So with that, I'll move to my Neovim repository. So this is where I keep my Neovim configs. We can see it has all of the folders set up. Let me open up the init.lua file. That is the main file that is loaded by Neovim whenever we fire it up. So as you can see, the init.lua has a bunch of required statements, right? And what required does is that it basically fetches whatever path you've put it in, and this is what the path structure looks like. So if you can see nvim2k.options, right, that is in my config folder. I have this lua folder, and in that I have the nvim2k namespace, and in that I have all of these files. And as you can see, I'm loading options, key maps, then I'm loading functions, and then auto command, and then finally I'm loading plugins, but we'll get into plugins a bit later. Let's just look at what options looks like. So in options, the options.lua file, I've basically configured all of the options, the default Neovim options. So I have just configured them here. I also have a Vim command call for things that weren't like the Neovim API doesn't have support yet to natively configure. So I'm just using Vim command, and yeah, it's just some basic Vim stuff, right? So these are the default the options that I've configured with the default Neovim API. Then if you look at the Lua file, the init Lua file, I'm loading the key maps, and in key maps what I basically have are all of my different key bindings, the default key bindings. I'm also using which key, which we'll get into a later video maybe, but these are some of the basic key bindings, and most of these are not plugin related, just key bindings for Neovim. Then we have functions, and in functions I have just a reload function right now. I used to have a lot more, but most of these I have moved into the plugin configuration. So right now I only have a configuration that lets me reload my Neovim config. Let's look at what else we have. We have the auto command. So yeah, as auto command, as the name suggests, it has a bunch of auto commands, some for doing formatting, some for setting up the white spaces correctly, and so on. So nothing super fancy. You can go and look at these files when you want. And the errors that you see here, right, they are because the LSP I'm using Selene, it's not able to recognize Vim, but you can just add a config for that. I explicitly do not add it because I do some plugin development, and at that time it helps. So with that, let me move back to the init.lua file, and now we have this call. It requires plugins.active file. So about plugins, right? I use lazy.nvim for configuring my plugins, and lazy provides you a lot of flexibility on how you want to arrange your plugins. So the way I have arranged it is that I keep all of my plugins in this file, plugins list.lua. So if you go to the plugins directory, you'll find the list.lua file, and this basically has all of the plugins that I use. And as you can see, I have tried to structure them. So these are all of them, structure them in blocks. So these are all of those that have that are related to appearance. These are all of the ones related to utils, and this is, I think, the biggest one. Then I have a block for LSP, this is for debugging. Then I have one for completion, one for telescope, and one for tracer. And finally, I have one for Rails or language specific changes, because I mostly work with Rails these days. So yeah, I am using this particular plugin. Let me quickly walk you through the different plugins that I use. So Wonder, Clue Align, Bufferline, uh, these these are the ones that I use for customization. One dark is the color scheme, Lua line is the nice line that you see at the bottom. This particular thing, buffer line, is what you see at the top. Then Nvim notify is what I'm using for notifications. So if I did a fn, I don't have any notifications yet, but if I got any notifications, you would see a nice prompt up here. Let me try and trigger that. I think if I uninstalled a particular server, right? Let me remove Tableau. I don't use that as much. So see, as soon as I removed it, I got this nice notification. That's what Nvim notify does. Then we have toggle term. So lets me do this. It basically gives me terminals, and I have mapped them to key bindings. Then I have Zen mode, which basically lets me do something like this. uh, don't use Zen mode as much now, but yeah, this is what Zen mode looks like, and I'm using it combined with Twilight, so it gives you a very scoped highlight, and it basically hides everything else. So this is what Zen mode does. Let me toggle it back. Then in new utilities, I have the Nvim tree, which is what you see on the left. Then there's oil, which is a directory editor, indent blank line for indenting, dressing for some Neovim UI. I think I can move dressing up here. And then web dev icons, I think that can also come in here. Git signs is the git signs that you see on the left. If you see, I have the lines mentioning that things were deleted from here on the status bar. So that is from git signs. Then I have diff view, which basically shows me the current git diff like this inside the editor. So that's git diff view. Let me close this buffer, and then I have NeoGet, which basically lets me do things like this, commit everything and make the changes. So let's say I did this, and let's say I changed the commit message to traciter. I think this edited the old one, but let me move back to my list. Right, I'll quickly open up LazyGit, stage the changes, and if I did a commit here, I could see maybe refactor plugins, and we moved rearrange plugins, right? And this basically lets me commit the changes. That's NeoGet. Then I have one for commenting, so which lets me do stuff like this. Then Nvim surround, that lets me quickly change my surround. So if you saw, currently I changed the quotes to uh, colon. So that happened with Nvim surround. I have auto pair set up for quickly jumping between let's say HTML starting and end tags, starting and end blocks. Then I have colorizer, which I also feel can go into UI. So colorizer is if I added a color syntax, right? Let's say I added color here at 8A4. So this basically highlights the color, and that's happening with Neovim colorizer. Then we have Wilder. This is something that I really like. So what that lets me do is have a nice command palette, and this has fuzzy searching. So let's say if I wanted to toggle Zen mode again for some reason, I could just type this or even this, and it will give me a nice way to sort through them. And this needs Python plugins. Once after you install it, you may need to do update remote plugins. You may want to, if you want, you can look at my previous Neovim video, and there I triggered the update remote plugins thing, and it gives me the nice wilder completions as well. Then I have one for refactoring by Primagen. Then I have this global search and replace thing. So let me try and open it. So it's refactor, and if I do a search and replace, right? So this is what it lets me do. Let's say I wanted to change Neovim, so it will show me all of the instances with Neovim, right? And if I added a replace, whatever I wanted to replace it with, it will basically do a global search and replace. Then I have Harpoon, which is basically for adding bookmarks. Tab out is something for completions. I haven't evaluated this in some time, but yeah, I might look into this. Then I have leap.nvim, which lets me do things like this. So yeah, let's say I wanted to jump to undo tree, right? The command for undo tree. And let's say I'm here for some reason. I can just hit S, hit CM, and then I can directly jump here. So yeah, it's just something that I use to jump around sometimes. Then I have tmux.nvim, and what that lets me do is move freely between my tmux panes and Neovim panes. So let's say I had a split here. Let's say I have these two splits, right? I can freely move between them with the same key bindings. So yeah, that's what uh, tmux.nvim is allowing me to do, and this is something that I very recently set up, and that goes for all of my plugins. I have set all of them very, like, I keep them very fluid. There are a few staples, but I try and experiment with new ones every now and then. Then this is gh.nvim, which I added very recently, and what this lets me do is it lets me check out PRs locally, work with them locally. It lets me basically interact with all of GitHub from Neovim, so I can do comments, interact with issues and stuff. Then this is a very handy one, undo tree. This is what it looks like. It basically lets me walk through the entire my undo tree, basically all of the changes that I have made so far, right? So if you remember, I added the color scheme thing. So yeah, that's undo tree. Let me toggle it back. Then I have which key, and which key is the thing that you saw, that you see here, right? This is all added with my configs, but this is what which key lets you do. It basically lets you create very nice key bindings, and it also has a nice UI to show the changes. Then I have snip run, which basically lets me run snippets of code. And yeah, if I had, let's say, a hello world file and I did snip run, it will run the code and show me the output. Not super handy when working on large projects, but for one-off scripts or one-off changes or particular method executions, this is really useful. Then I have co-author.nvim, which was something that I created. And what co-author lets me do is, let's say, it basically lets me create add co-authors to my git commit. So let's say if I did this, and if I went to the commit, and let's say I added another refactor plugins, and let's say I added more changes to UI list, right? And if I did co-author, git co-authors, right, it will basically fetch go through all of the git authors in your current repository, and it will show you all of them in a nice list, and you can select them from here, and it will add them as a git co-author syntax. And if I hit X, yep, I want to commit. And if I go back and look at the changes, you can see that the co-authored by changes are there, right? So that's co-author.nvim. Then there's markdown preview, which is a really nice one that lets you look at the current markdown file in a browser window, and it renders it out. So it's really useful when you're working on documentation. Then here I have all of the LSP stuff. LSP0 is kind of the wrapper around everything that takes care of configuring and linking with Mason and stuff. But yeah, this I have configured it. I don't think the dependencies structure should be like this, but yeah, you can update it if needed. I just keep it like so for some lazy and Vim improvements. And lazy and Vim loads all of them based on certain criteria. So yeah, this is a bit faster. Then I have LSP config, which is Neovim's default LSP config changes. Mason is the tool that I use for installing my packages. So this is what Mason looks like. It lets you install LSP, DAPs, linters, formatters, everything. Then this is a link plugin between LSP config and Mason. Then I have null ls, which lets you use non-LSP tools with Neovim LSP. Then I have trouble, that basically lets me do something like this. It shows me all of the current things, all of the things that are wrong, or all of the current diagnostics in the current file. So this is what trouble looks like. The plugin is called trouble. Then I have LSP lines, and LSP lines is the thing that you can see that's giving me this nice virtual line complaining about undefined Vim is not defined in the global scope, etc. So yeah, really useful when you are working on a large file to identify where you have the errors and see the error message as well. Then I have LSP signature, which lets me read documentation and definitions very easily. Then I have LSP Saga, which is a really nice plugin that lets me that adds a lot of fancy UI around LSP, and also provides a lot of highlights. I think they have a overview. Okay, yeah, I have triggered the outline, but I don't think I have LSP configured for Lua. I'm just using null ls, but LSP Saga has a bunch of useful commands. Maybe take a look. Then we have the debugging stuff. So in Vim DAP and DAP UI, it basically lets you use Neovim as a debugger, and it's a bit tricky to set up, I would say, initially. But if you and I have already added the configs for it here, so this works as expected. But yeah, once you can get this to work, it's really handy if you use debugging a lot. Then this is all for completions, nvim completion, and a bunch of plugins related to nvim completion. Then I have two snippets over here, Lua snip and friendly snippets. Then I have a bunch of telescope plugins, right? Telescope is the fuzzy file searcher, or the fuzzy searcher that you see here. and I have it integrated with FZF. I have one for symbols, so I can look for emojis from telescope, and I use them sometimes on my readme. So uh, let's say I wanted to add a rocket here for some reason, right? I can quickly search it and it will insert them, right? So that's what symbol is doing. Telescope hop lets me do something like this, lets me jump to a particular file uh, very quickly in the list. Let's say if I have a long list, if I hit Ctrl H, it will show me all of these keyboard shortcuts that I can use to quickly jump to uh, particular files or particular search results. Then we have Telecaster, which is my notes manager. So I use Neovim for all of my notes, and I think I'll make a separate video for my notes workflow, so I'm not gonna go into that right now. And same for calendar, it integrates with Telecaster, so I might make a separate video for this. uh, then I have Neovim Tricitor, and these are all of the plugins that I'm using related to Tricitor. One for refactoring, one for context, one for better text objects. Then I have one for endwise, auto tag, and finally the colorful brackets that you see. So if you see, these brackets are blue, these are yellow. So yeah, just another UI related thing, I would say. And then finally I have a single plugin for Ruby or Rails by T-Pope, the plugin artist, Vim plugin artist. And yeah, this is something that lets me work with Ruby files really easily. So yeah, that was all of the plugins. With that, let me show you how I actually load the plugins, right? If you see, I'll not go into the different plugin configurations right now. Maybe I'll make a separate playlist for those if I get any feedback that you want me to look at the different plugin configurations. But for now, I'm not going to go into individual plugins, but I'll show you how the plugins are basically written, or how the plugin configurations are written. So if you go into any particular plugin, right, this is what it would look like. So it basically has first I have this block with pcall, right? I basically check if I'm able to load the plugin in question, the current plugin. So in this case, this is the Leap plugin. So let's say if I have Leap installed, and if I do pcall require Leap, uh, status OK will be true, and I'll get the returned object here, right? So if status OK is true, then we can continue, we can run the setup. If it's not, as you can see, if not status OK, then we'll just simply return. So let's say even if I loaded this file, right, even if I loaded leap.lua and I didn't have leap actually installed locally, so this will just skip over the plugin and it won't cause any errors. So just a error catching mechanism that I discovered, and I think I discovered it by while looking at uh, Chris's Neovim configs. I think his user handle is Chris at machine on GitHub. So yeah, do take a look at his videos as well. He also has a Neovim series which was quite useful when I started. So yeah, this is what a particular Neovim plugin config would look like, right? And as you can see, I have all of the plugins that I listed in separate files. So you may also find things that were not there. So some things like specs, right? I'm not using this. I don't have this installed, but I still have the configs laying around just in case I needed them. And the way I load these plugins, right, the way I tell Neovim to load these plugins, right, to load which plugins and to load which configs, all of them are actually taken care of in the active.lua file. So before that, I think I'll quickly show you how I've configured lazy to load my list, right? Because this list right here, it just it defines a table of plugins, nothing else. There's no telling it that hey, install this plugin or do this or do that. This just returns a list of plugins. And where I've configured the loading is actually here. So this is the, let me disable the lines for now. Yeah, so this is the config for lazy Neovim, right? And the first block that you see is actually for installing lazy Neovim if it's not found in the path. So if you are on a new machine, this will take care of installing lazy Neovim for you as soon as you run Neovim for the first time. Then I have the pcall, and then I am loading the plugins here. Actually, if you see, I am doing nvim2k.plugins.list, right? And that gets me all of the plugins. And then when I'm doing lazy setup, I'm actually passing in the plugins here as a spec. So this is where the plugins actually get loaded to lazy, and that's how lazy actually installs them. So this is what lazy looks like, right? This is the lazy Neovim UI, and as you can see, these are all of the plugins that I just walked you through. Right, so this takes care of loading the plugins or installing the plugins, but how do you make sure that the plugins are actually configured the way they are? So in these files, I have just defined the configurations, right? I am not actually loading these configurations anywhere in these files, and where I'm doing them is in the active.lua file. And as you can see, I have another plugin list here, but with a different name, right? And I have some error checking at the bottom. So I'll tell you what this file basically does. So this file basically tells Neovim that hey, these are the list of plugins that I want to load. These are the list of plugins whose configurations I want to load, right? And the way it does is that whatever file names, whatever strings you see here, right, which key, lazy, one dark, etc., they actually map directly to what you see in this directory. So they are actually file names. So let's say the if I wanted to load gh configurations, right, I would pass in gh here. The string that I would include in the plugins table in this file, in the active file, will be called gh. So this has a one-to-one mapping with the file names. So for loading colorizer configs, I'll include the colorizer string here. For dressing, I'll include dressing, and so on, right? And as you can see, I still have specs laying around here, but since I don't even have it installed, it basically skips loading the configs with the pcall. And let me show you how I'm handling error management while loading these plugins. So this is the loop where all of the plugins basically get required, and as you can see, I'm doing a pcall require, and then I'm just merging nvim2k.plugins dot, and then whatever is the current plugin name. So let's say when the loop is at this step at refactoring, then it will change to pcall require nvim2k.plugins dot refactoring, and that will basically load that particular plugin. Dot dot is how you do string concatenation in Lua, and if in case there are no errors, then it's good, but in case there are errors, right, if not errors, then you can see, then I'm actually inserting the errors into the error message, right? I'm actually inserting the error message into errors, this table, and then I'm also inserting the plugin that caused the error into error plugins. So usually if you went with a conventional approach, uh, you'll see, like, let's say there are 10 different plugins that are causing errors, right, in this config. So if I had the conventional config, I would have to actually fix them one by one. So let's say I fixed auto pairs, then Neovim will complain about, let's say, Spectre having something wrong, or and then it will complain about tab out having something wrong. So every error will actually stop loading Neovim's other configs, right? So let's say if even if there's a single broken config, it will break your entire Neovim flow. So you may not be able to open up Neovim, or you may not have all of the key bindings required for your workflow to actually go ahead and fix the configs, because Neovim is my primary editor, and I edit Neovim configs with Neovim. So this is something that I just introduced to make sure that even if some plugin configuration is broken, I do not lose my other configs, right? I still get a fully functional Neovim config, my Neovim config, except the plugin that is broken. So then I can quickly jump in and fix that config, and boom, we are done. And what we are doing with the error and the error plugins is simply we have this vim.notify call, and if you remember, notify was the plugin that showed us the nice UI on the right side. So it basically notifies you all of the errors that occurred, and it will have a nice message as well. So it will see that there was an error loading this particular plugin, and yeah, it will include the error message. The title will have the plugin. So yes, just something that I came up with for easily loading the different plugins. So yeah, that's all when it comes to the plugin walkthrough. And if you want to quickly try this out, right, I'll show you what it would look like. I'll just log into a remote machine, and let me see if I have Neovim configured here. Okay, I do have Neovim configured here. So what I'm gonna do is I'll just remove the Neovim configurations, right? So this basically removes everything. I have Neovim, the default one, no key bindings, nothing. And what I'll do is I'll show you how you can quickly try it out. So let me just clone the repository, and I'll also drop the link for this in the chat. github.com and vim2k, right? This is what the repository is called, but you can also clone it to a nvim repository or anything that you want, but for now I'm just going to clone it to nvim2k. And then all you need to do is set up a symlink. So ewt/nvim2k, and I'll link it to config nvim, right? So as you can see, nvim is now linked to nvim2k. And now if I tried opening Neovim, see, I have all of my configs loaded, everything. I have telescope setup, I have the filters for, so this is the filter for nvim tree. But yeah, I basically have all of the plugins. So this is complaining about some package not being installed since we deleted the older configs. But once you just set up the symlink and try running Neovim, it will go ahead and lazy will set up all of the plugins. Everything will be linked. One thing that you may have to do is run this ts install all if you want to install all of the tree sitter commands, all of the tree sitter parsers, and then update remote plugins for setting up the wilder uh, this particular tool's configs, right? For that you need to run update remote plugins, and you may also want to install a few things from Mason. So as you can see, everything has been uninstalled. So yeah, just something that you can take a look while you are setting up this particular config. So what you can do is maybe clone this repository, play around with it, or even fork it and create your own version of it. So yeah, let me know how it goes, and if you are facing any troubles while setting up Neovim or setting up this particular config, drop a comment. I'm active. I respond to as many comments I can, and yeah, with that, I'll see you in the next one, and thanks a lot for watching.